The first time they dragged Elijah Grayson into the freezing shower, he didn't scream. The second time, they broke 2 of his ribs. Still, silence. By the 20th day, the guards stopped seeing him as human. That was their mistake. Because Grayson wasn't just another inmate in Blackridge Penitentiary. He was a bomb waiting to detonate. And when the famous civil rights attorney Marcus Kane stormed in with cameras rolling, the warden's face said it all. They'd been torturing the one man who could burn their entire corrupt system to the ground. From which country are you enjoying this story? Please make sure to tell us in the comments and subscribe for the next explosive chapter. The real question is, when the system is designed to break you, do you play dead or play God?
The fluorescent lights hummed a dull, lifeless tune in the intake room of Blackridge Penitentiary, their glow flickering against the chipped paint of the walls.
The air smelled of bleach and something fouler underneath. Sweat, rust, and the lingering scent of fear. Officer Dan Mercer dragged his baton along the iron bars as he walked, the metal ringing out in a slow, taunting rhythm. He smirked as he reached the last cell in the block, the one they called the quiet cage. Inside, the man known only as inmate number 247 sat motionless on the edge of his cot, his back straight, his hands resting on his knees. His dark eyes were fixed on the opposite wall, unblinking, as if he could see straight through the concrete into some other world. He hadn't spoken a single word since he arrived. Not during processing, not during meals, not even when Mercer and the others made it their personal mission to change that. Mercer leaned against the bars, his breath fogging the cold metal. "Morning, Ghost," he said, voice dripping with mock cheer. "Still giving us the silent treatment? Or did they cut out your tongue before they threw you in here?" No reaction. Not even a twitch. The other inmates had theories about number 247. Some said he was a hitman who took a vow of silence after a job went wrong. Others whispered he was a black ops soldier who'd seen things that broke his mind. A few even believed he was just a man who decided, one day, that the world wasn't worth talking to anymore. But the guards? They didn't care about theories. They just saw a man who refused to scream, and that made him a challenge. Mercer's smirk twisted into something uglier. He pulled his radio from his belt and muttered into it. A few minutes later, 2 more officers appeared. Hendricks, a thick-necked brute with a shaved head, and Ruiz, who always had the look of a man enjoying a private joke. "Time for another round," Mercer said, unlocking the cell. Inmate number 247 didn't resist as they hauled him to his feet. He didn't struggle as they marched him down the hall toward the showers. He didn't make a sound when Mercer turned the water ice cold and shoved him under the spray, the freezing needles biting into his skin. "You're a real tough guy, huh?" Ruiz said, grinning as number 247 stood there, water sluicing off him, his breath steady. "Let's see how long that lasts." They had other methods, of course. Stress positions in the yard until his muscles screamed. Solitary confinement in the dark for days, just to see if the silence would finally break him. Once, Hendricks even staged a fake transfer, whispering in his ear that they were taking him somewhere worse, somewhere he'd begged to talk. Nothing worked. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was that inmate number 247 wasn't just enduring. He was waiting, and his patience was about to pay off. The fluorescent lights hummed their dull electric hymn through the intake area of Blackridge Penitentiary, their sickly glow reflecting off the chipped paint of the cinderblock walls. The air carried the acrid sting of industrial cleaner undercut by something more organic. Sweat, stale urine, and the metallic tang of fear that seeped into the very concrete over decades. Officer Dan Mercer's boots scuffed against the linoleum as he dragged his baton along the iron bars, producing a slow, mocking rhythm that echoed through the cell block. He paused before the last cell on D block, the one the other COs called the quiet cage. Inside, the figure designated as inmate number 247 sat motionless on the edge of his cot, spine straight as a rifle barrel, hands resting palms down on his knees. His dark eyes remained fixed on the opposite wall, unblinking, as if he could see straight through the concrete into some other reality. The man hadn't spoken a single word since his arrival 3 weeks earlier. Not during processing, not during meals, not even when Mercer and the others made it their personal mission to change that fact. Mercer leaned against the bars, his breath fogging the cold metal in the morning chill. "Rise and shine, Ghost," he called, voice dripping with false cheer. "Another beautiful day in paradise. You gonna honor us with some words today?"
Or did they cut out your tongue before dumping you in our fine establishment? No reaction. Not so much as a flicker of the eyes. Throughout the cell block, other inmates watched the daily ritual with wary interest. Theories about number 247 circulated through the prison grapevine. Some said he was a cartel hitman who'd taken a vow of silence after a botched job. Others whispered he was special forces, his mind shattered by things he'd seen in some classified operation. A few of the older cons believed he was just a man who'd looked at the world one day and decided it wasn't worth talking to anymore. Mercer's smirk twisted into something darker as he unclipped his radio. "Hendricks, Ruiz, we got a volunteer for today's attitude adjustment." His keys jingled as he unlocked the cell door. "Let's see if we can't get our friend here to sing for us." Inmate number 247 didn't resist as they hauled him to his feet. Didn't flinch when Hendricks dug his fingers into pressure points behind his ears. Didn't react when Ruiz whispered threats about what would happen in the shower stalls. The man moved with eerie calm, like a sleepwalker, as they marched him down the corridor toward the communal washroom. The freezing water hit like 1,000 needles when Mercer wrenched the handle to full cold. Number 247 stood motionless under the assault, muscles taut but breathing steady as the icy torrent sluiced over his close-cropped hair and down the scars that mapped his back. "Jesus, this guy's like a fucking statue," Ruiz muttered, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Even the guards were feeling the morning chill creeping into their bones. Mercer's jaw tightened. They tried everything short of outright beating him. Stress positions in the yard until his muscles trembled with exhaustion. Forgotten meals, solitary confinement in the dark for days on end. Last week, Hendricks had staged an elaborate ruse about transferring him to a max security facility upstate, whispering graphic descriptions of what awaited him there. Nothing so much as cracked the man's eerie composure. As they escorted the dripping inmate back to his cell, rookie guard Lopez nearly collided with him in the corridor. The young officer's eyes darted to number 247's battered knuckles, then away just as quickly. "Warden wants to see you," he told Mercer, voice pitched low. "Something about the prisoner's paperwork." Mercer's gut tightened. There'd always been something off about this one. No visitor logs, no disciplinary record, no transfer documents. Just a court order with enough blacked-out sections to make a conspiracy theorist drool. He shot a glance at the silent inmate now sitting cross-legged on his bunk, water still dripping from his earlobes onto the thin mattress. The man's eyes were closed, but Mercer would have sworn he saw the ghost of a smile tug at his lips. Across the prison, in an office that smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee, Warden Cole stared at the facts in his hands. The words, "protective custody," and "federal witness" swam before his eyes. His phone rang again, the third call this morning from numbers he didn't recognize. Outside his window, a news van pulled into the staff parking lot, its satellite dish unfolding like some mechanical predator spreading its wings. Back in cell block D, inmate number 247 finally opened his eyes. Somewhere beyond these walls, a car door slammed. He'd known this moment would come. Known it from the instant they'd pulled the hood off his head in that underground garage, and he'd seen the fear in the cartel lieutenant's eyes. Known it through every freezing shower, every hour spent standing in stress positions, every silent meal eaten under the watchful eyes of men who thought themselves as masters. The shouting started near the front gates. Running footsteps echoed down the corridors. Number 247 tilted his head, listening to the beautiful chaos unfolding beyond his cell. After 23 days of perfect silence, he moistened his cracked lips and prepared to speak. The game was about to change. The shouting from the front gate swelled into a roar, a dissonant chorus of barked orders and the static-laced crackle of radios. Inmate number 247 didn't move from his cot, but his posture shifted almost imperceptibly, his shoulders squaring as his chin lifted just enough to track the commotion echoing down the corridor. Around him, the other prisoners pressed against their bars, fingers curling around cold steel as they strained to see past the curve of the cell block. Even the guards, usually so quick to assert control, froze mid-step, their hands hovering near belt loops where batons and pepper spray hung untouched. The heavy security doors burst open with a metallic groan. A man in a charcoal suit that cost more than most inmates made in a year strode into the cell block like he owned the concrete beneath his shoes. His polished Oxford struck the linoleum with precise, measured clicks that cut through the noise. Behind him surged a tide of reporters, their cameras flashing like muzzle flares in the dim prison lighting. Guards scrambled to form a barrier, But the man moved with the unstoppable momentum of a man who'd spent years walking into places he wasn't wanted and leaving with exactly what he came for. Warden Cole appeared behind him, his face mottled red beneath thinning gray hair. "You can't just... This is a restricted..." The man didn't break stride. His gaze swept the cell block once before locking onto cell D14, where number 247 sat watching with the first spark of genuine interest he'd shown in 23 days. "Mr. Grayson," the man said. His voice was calm, controlled, but carried an edge that made the nearest guard take an unconscious step back. "It's been a while." A murmur rippled through the inmates. Grayson. A name. Not a number. Not a ghost. Officer Mercer recovered first, stepping forward with his hand hovering near his belt. "Who the hell are you?" The man turned just enough to fix Mercer with a look that could have stopped a charging bull. "Marcus Kane." He let the name hang in the air for a beat before adding, "Attorney, and if you so much as twitch toward my client right now, I promise you'll be unemployed before your next paycheck clears." The cameras caught every word. Kane turned back to number 247, to Grayson, and lowered his voice just enough that the microphones wouldn't pick it up. "You ready to get out of here?" For the first time since he'd been processed into Blackridge, Grayson's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Thought you'd never ask." The warden found his voice again. "This is highly irregular." Kane didn't even look at him as he produced a folded document from his inside pocket, snapping it open with a flick of his wrist. "Federal court order. Elijah Grayson was placed in your facility as a material witness under protective custody. Your paperwork was supposed to reflect that." His eyes finally cut to Cole. "Imagine my surprise when I discovered my client had been cataloged as a general population inmate with no special designation." The blood drained from the warden's face. One of the reporters shoved a microphone forward. "Mr. Grayson, why didn't you speak this entire time?" Grayson turned his head just enough to meet the camera's lens. His voice, when it came, was rougher than expected, worn from weeks of disuse but steady as stone. "I was listening." The ride out was a blur of shouted questions and flashing lights. Kane's team had a black SUV waiting at the curb, engine running. As they pulled away from the prison, Grayson watched through the tinted windows as the reporters turned their attention to the suddenly sweating warden. In the quiet of the car, Kane finally let his professional mask slip just enough to rub at his temples. "You could have signaled me sooner." Grayson didn't answer immediately. He was watching the prison shrink in the side mirror, his reflection superimposed over the receding outline of the guard towers. "They talked more when they thought I wasn't a threat." Kane glanced at him. "And?" Grayson reached into the waistband of his prison-issued pants and produced a slim recording device no larger than a thumbnail. "And now we have every name of every cop on Cartwright's payroll." The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the tires on asphalt. Kane leaned back against the leather seats. "You realize this is going to burn down half the department." Grayson finally looked away from the window. His eyes were dark, unreadable. That was the point. The car accelerated onto the highway, carrying them toward the city skyline. Behind them, Blackridge Penitentiary stood silhouetted against the afternoon sun, its walls suddenly looking far less imposing than they had that morning. The recording device sat between them on the polished mahogany desk, its matte black surface absorbing the warm glow of Marcus Kane's office lights. Grayson leaned back in the leather chair, fingers steepled under his chin, watching as Kane plugged the tiny drive into his computer. The soft whir of the machine's fan was the only sound in the room for several long seconds. "You realize," Kane said without looking up, "that we're about to set fire to the careers of at least 12 decorated officers." Grayson's exhale might have been a laugh in another context. Decorated by who? The same people who took Cartwright's money to look the other way. His fingers tapped once against his knee. "Play it." The audio crackled to life, filling the room with the unmistakable voice of Officer Dan Mercer. Asterisk. "Think the little mute is actually listening? Look at him. He's about 2 steps away from pissing himself." Asterisk. A chorus of laughter followed, then the clink of beer bottles. Asterisk. "Nah man, he's harmless. Just another nobody they dumped here to rot." Asterisk. Kane's jaw tightened as the recording continued. The guards' voices grew louder, more relaxed as they drank. Then came the damning words, slurred but clear. Asterisk. "Shit, after what we pulled for Cartwright last month. This is nothing." Warden's got our backs long as those payments keep coming. Asterisk.
Grayson didn't move, but his eyes darkened.
There's 37 hours of that. Names, dates, locations where they stashed evidence. He reached forward and tapped the spacebar, pausing the recording. Enough to bury the entire operation. The intercom on Kane's desk buzzed. Mr. Kane? There's a Detective Vasquez here to see you. Says it's urgent. Kane and Grayson exchanged a glance. Let me guess, Grayson murmured. First rat off the sinking ship. Detective Vasquez looked like he hadn't slept in days. His tie was loosened, his dress shirt wrinkled, and his hand shook slightly as he accepted the coffee Kane offered.
I wasn't part of it, he said immediately, eyes darting to Grayson. But I knew. And I
didn't stop it. Kane leaned against his desk, arms crossed. Why now? Vasquez's laugh was hollow. Because the morning news showed Marcus Kane walking out of Blackridge with their so-called mute inmate, and half the precinct started sweating through their shirts. He set the coffee down untouched. There's going to be a raid tonight. Cartwright's men are moving the evidence locker from the old precinct house on 5th. If you want the proof that ties all this together, you've got about 4 hours. Grayson stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood. Then we're done talking. As Vasquez left, Kane turned to Grayson. We take this to the feds. Right now. Proper channels. Grayson was already pulling on his jacket. Channels are how this got buried in the first place. He met Kane's gaze. You coming or not? The city lights blurred past the car windows as Kane drove them toward the 5th precinct. Grayson sat in silence, staring at his reflection in the glass. After 23 days of playing mute, of enduring every humiliation the guards could devise, the game was finally turning. You knew, Kane said suddenly. The whole time. You knew they'd talk in front of you. Grayson's smile was razor thin. Everyone talks to the furniture. The old precinct house loomed ahead, its brick facade darkened by years of exhaust and neglect. Kane parked 2 blocks away, watching as Grayson checked the small recorder one last time. Last chance to do this the right way, Kane said. Grayson opened the car door. This is the right way. Then he was gone, melting into the shadows between streetlights. Inside the precinct, voices echoed through the empty halls. Grayson moved silently, the recorder in his pocket capturing every word as Cartwright's men boxed up decades of corruption. He was nearly to the evidence room when a floorboard creaked underfoot. The conversation in the next room cut off abruptly. Who's there? Grayson stepped into the light. Evening. Gentlemen. Miss me. The looks on their faces would have been comical if not for the guns that appeared a second later. But Grayson didn't flinch. Because right on schedule, the sound of sirens split the night air. Kane stepped through the front door behind a phalanx of federal agents. Everyone freeze. FBI. As the agents swarmed the room, Grayson locked eyes with the lead detective, the same man who'd signed off on his disappearance into Blackridge. The man's face went pale. You, he breathed. Grayson smiled. Me. Outside, the news vans were already arriving. The story would lead every morning broadcast. By noon, 12 officers would be in custody. By nightfall, Cartwright himself would be on a plane to a country with no extradition. But for now, standing in the flashing red and blue lights, Grayson simply breathed in the cool night air. The silence had served its purpose. Now it was time to speak. The morning sun cut through the blinds of the safe house, painting stripes of gold across the scattered case files and empty coffee cups. Grayson sat at the kitchen table, a steaming mug between his hands, watching the news coverage on the small television mounted in the corner. His own face stared back at him from the screen, older, wearier than he remembered, as the anchor recounted the previous night's raid in breathless detail. Asterisk, sources confirm at least 18 arrests so far in connection with the Cartwright syndicate, including high-ranking officers within the police department. The scandal has sent shockwaves through the city's political and law enforcement circles. Asterisk. The volume was low, but the words still carried weight. Grayson took a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitter heat ground him. Behind him, the safehouse door opened and closed, followed by the familiar cadence of Kane's footsteps. You're up early, Kane said, shrugging out of his overcoat. He looked like he hadn't slept. Grayson didn't turn away from the screen. Could say the same about you. Kane dropped a manila folder onto the table. Grand jury subpoenas. They want you in front of them by the end of the week. That got Grayson's attention. He set the mug down and flipped open the folder. His name was printed in bold at the top of the first page. Asterisk Elijah Grayson. Material witness. Asterisk. They're moving fast, he observed. Kane exhaled, running a hand through his hair. They have to. Half the city's screaming for blood, and the other half is scrambling to cover their asses. He pulled out a chair and sat, leaning forward. Which is why we need to talk about security. Grayson arched a brow. I've been handling myself just fine. Before, you were a ghost. Now. Kane gestured to the TV, where Grayson's face was still front and center. You're the most recognizable witness in the state. Cartwright might be gone, but his people aren't. As if on cue, Grayson's phone buzzed. An unknown number. He picked it up, thumb hovering over the screen. Kane frowned. You expecting a call? Grayson didn't answer. He tapped accept and held the phone to his ear. Silence stretched for a beat. Then a voice, smooth and mocking, slithered through the line. Asterisk. Hello, Elijah. Miss me? Asterisk. Grayson's blood turned to ice. He knew that voice. Knew it better than his own. Dmitry Volkov. Cartwright's enforcer. The man who'd personally overseen Grayson's disappearance into Blackridge. The phone creaked in Grayson's grip. You're supposed to be in a hole somewhere. Volkov's laugh was a razor dragged over skin. Asterisk. And you were supposed to stay quiet. Looks like we're both full of surprises. Asterisk a pause. Asterisk. I'd watch my back if I were you. The game's not over yet. Asterisk. The line went dead. Kane was already on his feet. Who was that? Grayson set the phone down carefully, his movements deliberate. Trouble. Outside, a car door slammed. Both men tensed, eyes snapping toward the window. The safe house was supposed to be secure, known only to Kane and a handful of trusted agents. Grayson stood, his chair scraping against the floor. You tell anyone we were here? Kane's expression darkened. No. Another car door. Then another. Grayson didn't wait. He moved to the closet, pulling out the go-bag he'd prepared weeks ago. We need to go. Now. Kane didn't argue. He was already reaching for his own phone, dialing a number with quick, practiced motions. I've got a contact at the bureau. They can. The first gunshot shattered the front window. Grayson reacted on instinct, shoving Kane to the floor as glass rained down around them. Another shot followed, then another, punching through the drywall in bursts of splintered plaster. Back door. Grayson barked, yanking Kane toward the kitchen. They barely made it out before the front door exploded inward, the sound of heavy boots and shouted orders echoing through the house. Grayson didn't look back. He led Kane through the narrow alley behind the safe house, their breaths coming in sharp, controlled bursts as they put distance between themselves and the ambush. 3 blocks over, they ducked into a crowded diner, sliding into a booth at the back. Kane's hands were steady as he pulled out his phone again, but his voice was tight with fury. That wasn't just a leak. Someone gave them our location. Grayson watched the street through the diner's grimy window. Or they've been tracking us this whole time. The waitress arrived, oblivious to the tension, and poured them 2 cups of coffee. Grayson nodded his thanks, but his mind was elsewhere, piecing together the chain of events that had led them here. Volkov wasn't just a hired gun. He was a strategist. And if he was back in play, then the real fight was just beginning. Kane's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then looked up, his expression grim. They hit the evidence locker. Took everything. Grayson's fingers tightened around his coffee cup. Then we'll get it back. Outside, a black sedan rolled slowly past the diner. Grayson didn't need to see the occupants to know who they were. The game, as Volkov had said, wasn't over. It had only just begun. The diner's coffee had gone cold. Grayson stared into the murky depths of his cup, watching the reflection of neon lights from the street outside warp and distort in the dark liquid. Across from him, Kane was murmuring into his phone, his free hand tapping an erratic rhythm against the Formica tabletop.
The diner's ambient noise, the clatter of dishes, the low hum of conversation, should have been comforting. Instead, every sound set Grayson's nerves on edge. Kane ended the call with a sharp exhale. They're gone. No trail, no witnesses. Just a burned-out van found near the docks. Grayson didn't react immediately. His mind was replaying the ambush frame by frame, the precision of it, the timing. This hadn't been some desperate last stand by Cartwright's remnants. This was calculated, professional.
Volkov didn't come back alone, Grayson said finally.
He's got support. Someone with access. Kane's jaw tightened. You think it's someone inside the bureau? Grayson lifted his gaze. I think someone knew exactly where that evidence was being held. And exactly where we were. He pushed the coffee cup aside. We need to move. They left the diner through the kitchen, slipping out the back door into an alley strewn with broken pallets and overflowing dumpsters. The night air was thick with the smell of salt and diesel. The docks weren't far. Grayson led the way, his movements silent, his senses tuned to every shadow. Kane kept pace, his voice low. Where are we going? Somewhere they won't expect. The address Grayson gave the cab driver was for a luxury high-rise downtown. Kane shot him a questioning look as they rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, but Grayson didn't elaborate. The doors opened onto a dimly lit hallway, and Grayson moved with purpose to the penthouse at the end. He knocked twice, paused, then added a third, sharper rap. The door opened to reveal a woman in her late 40s, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, her eyes sharp behind wireframe glasses. She took one look at Grayson and sighed. Took you long enough. Dr. Lillian Voss stepped aside to let them in. Her penthouse was a study in controlled chaos, walls lined with bookshelves, a sprawling desk covered in open case files, and a bank of monitors displaying news feeds from around the world. Kane blinked. You're Lillian Voss? The Lillian Voss? The forensic accountant who took down the Marino syndicate. Voss ignored him, focusing on Grayson. I assume this isn't a social call. Grayson didn't waste time. They hit the evidence locker. Took everything. Voss's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened around the tumbler of whiskey she was holding. Including the ledger. That got a reaction. Voss set her glass down with a sharp click. Christ. Elijah. That ledger ties half the city's elite to Cartwright's operation. Kane cut in. Which is exactly why we need to find it before. Voss was already moving to her desk, waking one of the monitors. Before they burn it? Please. If Volkov went to the trouble of stealing it, he's not destroying it. He's using it. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. The question is, who's he leveraging first? The monitor flickered to life, displaying a complex web of names and connections, a digital recreation of Cartwright's network. Grayson studied it, his eyes catching on a cluster of names near the center. Mayor Henley, he murmured. Voss nodded. If Volkov's smart, and he is, he'll start at the top. Henley's up for re-election. A scandal like this would bury him. Kane frowned. So we warn him. Grayson and Voss exchanged a look. No, Grayson said. We let Volkov make his move. Kane stared at him. Are you out of your mind? We can't just. We don't have time to chase shadows, Grayson interrupted. But we know where Volkov's going next. And when. He tapped the screen, highlighting an event on Henley's calendar. The fundraiser. 3 days from now. Every important name in the city will be there. Voss smiled thinly, including Volkov's buyer. The pieces clicked together for Kane. You want to use Henley as bait. Grayson's expression was grim. I want this over. Outside, the city glittered, indifferent to the war being waged in its shadows. Somewhere out there, Volkov was making his play, and Grayson would be waiting. The safe house smelled of gun oil and stale takeout. Grayson sat at the rickety kitchen table, methodically disassembling and cleaning his pistol under the flickering fluorescent light. Each piece gleamed as he wiped it down. Barrel, slide, recoil spring, before slotting them back together with practiced ease. Across from him, Kane scrolled through security schematics of the mayor's fundraiser venue on a tablet. His brow furrowed. They've got metal detectors at every entrance,
Kane muttered. Full pat-downs. Even the waitstaff gets screened. Grayson didn't look up. Then we don't go in armed. Kane set the tablet down with a thud. You can't be serious. The pistol clicked as Grayson slid the magazine home. Volkov won't be either. He'll have someone on the inside. He stood, holstering the weapon at the small of his back. We need to move. Voss should have the invites by now. The drive to Voss's penthouse was tense, the silence broken only by Kane's occasional muttered directions. Grayson kept one eye on the mirrors, watching for tails, but the streets were clean. Too clean. Volkov was waiting. He could feel it. Voss greeted them with 2 embossed invitations and a dress bag. You're going as James and Daniel Whitmore, philanthropists from Boston. She handed Kane a slim folder. Backgrounds are all there. Memorize them. Kane flipped through the documents. This is remarkably thorough. Voss smirked. I've had these ready since Cartwright's indictment. She turned to Grayson, her expression sobering. There's something else. I dug deeper into Volkov's movements since he resurfaced. She tapped a key, and one of her monitors displayed surveillance footage. Volkov entering a nondescript office building downtown. He's been meeting with someone with ties to Henley's campaign. The image zoomed in on a second figure, a woman in an expensive pantsuit, her face partially obscured by sunglasses. Kane sucked in a breath. Is that Councilwoman Evelyn Shaw? Voss confirmed. Chair of the city's oversight committee, and apparently Volkov's new best friend. Grayson studied the image, his mind racing. Shaw was untouchable, a rising star in local politics with national aspirations. If she was working with Volkov, this goes deeper than we thought, Kane murmured. Grayson took the invitations. Then we dig faster. The night of the fundraiser arrived in a blur of last-minute preparations. The mayor's mansion was lit up like a beacon, valets ushering Blacktown cars to the curb as camera flashes popped. Grayson adjusted his tie in the mirror of their rented sedan, the silk strangling tight around his throat. Kane eyed him. You look like you're going to your own execution. Grayson ignored him, checking his watch. We stick to the plan. Get in, confirm Shaw's involvement, get out. Simple, Kane said dryly. Nothing about this was simple. The grand ballroom was a sea of champagne flutes and forced laughter. Grayson moved through the crowd like a ghost, his eyes scanning for Volkov or Shaw while Kane worked the room, schmoozing with the city's elite. An hour passed with no sign of either. Then Grayson spotted her. Shaw stood near the balcony doors, her auburn hair catching the light as she spoke with a group of donors. Alone. Grayson was halfway to her when a hand caught his elbow. Mr. Whitmore. The voice was smooth as aged whiskey. What an unexpected pleasure. Grayson turned to face Dmitry Volkov for the first time in months. The man looked the same, sharp suit, sharper smile, but there was something new in his eyes. Amusement. Volkov leaned in, his breath hot against Grayson's ear. I'd say run, but we both know how that ends. Then he was gone, melting into the crowd. Grayson's phone buzzed. A text from Kane. Asterisk balcony. Now. Asterisk. He found Kane gripping the railing, his face pale. They're not just leveraging Henley, Kane said without preamble. They're replacing him. He handed Grayson his phone, a photo of Shaw and Volkov in quiet conversation, a third figure barely visible in the shadows. Grayson zoomed in. The blood drained from his face. Standing with them was Marcus Kane. His Kane. Their Kane. The phone slipped from his fingers as the balcony doors burst open behind them. The balcony doors slammed open with enough force to rattle the glass. Grayson didn't turn. His hand was already inside his jacket, fingers brushing the cool metal of the pistol concealed there as he kept his eyes locked on Kane. No, not Kane. The stranger wearing Kane's face who'd just been caught conspiring with Volkov and Shaw. Elijah! The voice from behind him was familiar. Too familiar. Grayson turned slowly. Another Marcus Kane stood in the doorway, his suit rumpled, his breathing ragged like he'd been running. His eyes darted between Grayson and the man at the railing before hardening with recognition. That's not me. The Kane at the balcony railing sighed dramatically. Really, Marcus? That's your play. He reached into his pocket. Grayson's pistol cleared leather before the imposter's hand had fully emerged. "Don't!" The imposter froze, then smiled. It was Kane's smile, but wrong. Sharper at the edges, crueler. "You always were quick." His fingers inched forward. Grayson shot him through the palm. The gunshot cracked through the night air. The imposter staggered back, blood spraying across the balcony tiles as he clutched his ruined hand. Behind him, the real Kane lunged forward, just as Councilwoman Shaw stepped through the doors, her designer heels clicking against the stone. "Enough!" The imposter's face shimmered, literally shimmered, like heat waves on pavement. When it cleared, a stranger stood in Kane's place. Early 30s, sandy hair, the kind of blandly handsome face designed to be forgotten. Grayson's grip on the pistol didn't waver. "Who the hell are you?" "Asset 12, the man gritted out through clenched teeth. "Though you can call me Jeremy." Shaw sighed. "Really, Jeremy? Your name?" Kane, the real Kane, stepped forward. "You're working with doppelgangers now, Evelyn? That's a new low, even for you." Shaw's smile was all teeth. "Oh, Marcus, you always did think too small." She reached into her clutch and produced a slim remote. This was never about replacing Henley. Her thumb hovered over a red button. "It's about replacing everyone." Grayson saw the trap too late. The balcony wasn't a meeting place. It was a kill box. He tackled Kane as Shaw pressed the button. The explosion blew out the balcony doors in a shower of glass and splintered wood. Grayson felt the heat sear his back as they crashed through the railing, tumbling into the manicured hedges below. Somewhere above them, Shaw was screaming orders. Kane groaned beneath him. "Tell me you have a plan." Grayson rolled off him, wincing as glass shards pulled free from his jacket. "Run!" They ran. The mansion's grounds were chaos. Guests screaming, security radios squawking. Grayson led them through the maze of hedges toward the service gate, his mind racing. Doppelgangers. Shaw hadn't wanted to blackmail the mayor. She wanted to replace him. Replace everyone. And Kane had been her first target. The service alley behind the mansion was deserted. Grayson pressed Kane against the brick wall, checking him for injuries. "How long has he been impersonating you?" Kane's breathing was ragged. "Since the safe house attack. Maybe longer." He gripped Grayson's arm. "Elijah, if they can mimic us perfectly, then no one's safe," Grayson finished. He pulled out his phone and dialed the only number left that might help. Voss answered on the first ring. "I saw the news. You're alive. For now." Grayson watched the alley entrance. "We need everything you have on Project Echo." A pause. "How do you know that name?" "Because Shaw just used one of their assets to impersonate Kane." Voss's breath hitched. "Get to the docks. Warehouse 17. And Elijah." Her voice dropped. "Trust no one." The line went dead. Kane wiped blood from his lip. "What's Project Echo?" Grayson started moving. "The reason we're all expendable." Somewhere in the city, a dozen faces shifted subtly in the dark. The game had changed. And Grayson was the only one who knew the rules. The docks at night were a labyrinth of shadows and rusting metal. Grayson moved between the shipping containers like a wraith, his boots silent on the damp concrete. Behind him, Kane struggled to keep up, his breath coming in short, pained bursts from the fall. The air reeked of salt and diesel, the only light coming from the occasional flickering bulb high above. Warehouse 17 loomed ahead, an unremarkable concrete box with a faded number stenciled above the roll-up door. Grayson paused at the service entrance, his hand hovering near his weapon as he listened. No voices, no footsteps, just the distant lap of water against the pilings. He tried the knob. Unlocked. The interior was cavernous, lit only by the blue glow of server racks lining the far wall. Voss stood at a central workstation, her fingers flying across a holographic keyboard. She didn't look up as they entered. "You're late." Grayson scanned the shadows. "We're here. Start talking." Voss finally turned, her face illuminated by the screens. Project Echo began as a DARPA initiative, nanotech capable of mimicking human tissue at a molecular level. She tapped a key, and the monitors displayed schematics of what looked like a liquid metal mask. Applied correctly, it can perfectly replicate someone's appearance, voice, mannerisms. Kane stepped forward. You're telling me that thing back there was wearing Marcus Kane's face like a suit? Not just wearing. Voss's mouth tightened. Becoming. For short periods, anyway. The tech is unstable beyond 12 hours. She pulled up a new file, a list of names with red checkmarks beside them. Shaw's been testing it for years. Politicians, judges, cops, anyone who could give her faction control. Grayson studied the list. Half the names were people he'd helped put away. People who'd mysteriously recanted testimony or changed rulings overnight. Where's the original tech? Gone. Voss's hands clenched. Stolen from my lab 6 years ago. I've been tracking it ever since. A piece clicked into place. That's why you helped take down Marino. He was Shaw's first backer. Voss nodded. I thought cutting off her funding would stop it. I was wrong. Kane rubbed his temples. So what now? We can't trust anyone. How do we fight this? The warehouse door creaked open. All three of them turned as a figure stepped into the dim light. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the easy confidence of a predator. Grayson's pistol was up before he fully registered the face. His own. The other Grayson smiled. Relax. Elijah. I'm here to help. Voss went very still. Asset 0. The imposter spread his hands. Call me Daniel. His voice was Grayson's down to the rasp. I'm the prototype. The first successful echo. His eyes locked onto Grayson's. And I know where Shaw's keeping the originals. Kane made a strangled noise. This is insane. Daniel chuckled. Wait till you see the cloning vats. Grayson didn't lower his gun. Why turn on them now? The smile faded. Because I wasn't supposed to develop preferences. Or memories. Daniel tapped his temple. But I remember the lab. The tests. How many of me they scrapped before I worked right. His gaze flicked to Voss. You made me too well, Doctor. Voss looked ill. You were never supposed to be autonomous. Daniel's laugh was bitter. And you were never supposed to lose control of your project. Yet here we are. He turned back to Grayson. So, you want to burn this whole thing down or what? Somewhere in the city, 100 faces might be shifting at that very moment. 100 puppets on Shaw's strings. Grayson holstered his weapon. Show me. The van rattled through the industrial district, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. Grayson sat across from his doppelganger, watching the way Daniel's fingers tapped against his knee, the same restless habit he'd thought was uniquely his. Behind the wheel, Kane drove with white-knuckled focus, while Voss monitored a handheld scanner in the passenger seat. Next left, Daniel said. Then follow the service road to the dead end. Kane shot him a look in the rear view. You're sure this is the place? Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. I remember every second of being grown there. The van bounced over potholes as they turned onto an unmarked road, weeds scraping against the undercarriage. Ahead loomed a derelict pharmaceutical plant, its windows boarded up, chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Grayson's skin prickled. He knew this place. You used the old Cartwright labs, he said slowly. Daniel nodded. Poetic, isn't it? The same facility where they pumped you full of drugs to make you talk became where they learned to wear faces like yours. Voss's grip tightened on the scanner. The nanites need specialized bioreactors to stabilize. This would have been one of the few places equipped. Enough. Grayson cut her off with a look. The less he knew about how this horror show worked, the better. Kane killed the engine behind a crumbling loading dock. They exited in silence, weapons drawn. Daniel led them to a rusted service elevator, prying the doors open with inhuman strength. The descent took 30 seconds. 30 seconds of grinding cables and Grayson's pulse hammering in his throat. The doors opened onto hell. Rows of glass tanks stretched into the distance, each filled with amber fluid and a floating body. Some were fully formed, copies of politicians, law enforcement, faces Grayson recognized from news briefings. Others were wrong, half-formed limbs, faces melted like wax. A child-sized figure with too many fingers. Kane gagged. Jesus Christ. Voss moved to the nearest terminal, her face pale. They've accelerated the growth cycles. These are third-gen models. Faster, more stable. Her hands trembled over the keyboard. Shaw's preparing for a mass deployment. Daniel walked down the aisle, trailing his fingers along the tanks. The originals are kept in cryo on the lower level. Shaw likes to have backups. Grayson forced himself to look at the nearest tank. The face staring back was his own. A sudden alarm blared. Red light strobed across the lab as steel shutters slammed down over the exits. Intruders detected, a mechanized voice announced. Containment protocol initiated. Voss spun toward the terminal. They've locked us in. Daniel moved first, grabbing a fire axe from the wall and smashing the nearest control panel. Weapons cache. West corridor. They ran as vents along the ceiling hissed open, releasing a pale gas. Grayson's eyes burned instantly. He fumbled for the bandana in his pocket, tying it over his nose and mouth. Behind him, Kane stumbled, coughing violently. The weapons locker was exactly where Daniel said. Grayson kicked it open, tossing rifles to Kane and Voss before slamming a fresh magazine into his own pistol. We blow the reactors. Collapse the whole place. Voss shook her head. The nanites could survive. Then we burn it. Grayson grabbed a canister marked with a flammable symbol. All the way down. The gas thickened as they moved deeper into the facility. Shapes moved in the mist, figures in lab coats, security teams with respirators. Gunfire erupted. Grayson returned it without hesitation, watching as one of the shooters went down, only for his face to ripple and reform as another guard entirely. They're all echoes. Kane shouted. Daniel grabbed Grayson's arm, pointing to a reinforced door at the end of the hall. Cryo's through there. Shaw's probably. The bullet took him between the eyes. Daniel collapsed without a sound, blood pooling around his head. Grayson spun to see Councilwoman Shaw step from the mist, a smoking pistol in her hand. 3 identical bodyguards flanked her, their faces blank slates waiting to be imprinted. Such a waste, Shaw sighed. He was my favorite. Grayson raised his weapon. Game's over. Shaw smiled. Oh, Elijah. It's just beginning. She pressed a button on her wrist. Every tank in the facility hissed open at once. The hiss of opening tanks filled the chamber like a nest of snakes stirring. Grayson's finger tightened on the trigger as amber fluid gushed across the floor, carrying with it the slick, twitching forms of half-formed echoes. Shaw smiled over the barrel of her pistol. Meet the future, gentlemen. Kane fired first. His round took one of Shaw's blank-faced guards in the throat, sending the man staggering back, but not before the remaining 2 opened fire. Grayson dragged Voss behind a server rack as bullets chewed through the air. We need to move. Voss shouted over the alarms. She clutched the scanner to her chest, its screen flashing red. The reactors, if we overload them now, the whole facility goes up. Grayson risked a glance around the edge of their cover. The first of the awakened echoes were pulling themselves from their tanks, limbs jerking unnaturally as the nanites adapted to motor control. One turned its featureless face toward the gunfire and began loping forward on all fours. Kane ejected a spent magazine. We'll never make it to the reactors. A wet cough sounded behind them. Daniel, the real Daniel, bleeding out on the floor, lifted a trembling hand. Back door, in the sublevel. His voice bubbled with blood. Leads, right to the core. Shaw's laughter rang out. Loyal to the end, aren't you? She fired again, the bullet punching through Daniel's chest. Grayson didn't hesitate. He emptied half his magazine in Shaw's direction, forcing her and the remaining guards back, then grabbed Voss's arm. Go! Now! They ran as the facility descended into chaos. Echoes lurched from their tanks, some fully formed, others grotesque mockeries of humanity. One grabbed at Kane's ankle with too many fingers. Grayson put a bullet through its skull without breaking stride. The nanites inside sparked and died, the face melting back into featureless goo. The service stairwell was a nightmare of flickering lights and distant screams. Voss led the way down, her scanner now emitting a continuous shrill beep. The reactors are already unstable. We might not need to. The explosion above cut her off. The entire facility shuddered, raining dust and sparks from the ceiling. Somewhere, a tank must have ruptured. Kane coughed into his sleeve. That's our cue to hurry. Sublevel 3 was colder, the air thick with the hum of machinery. The reactor core dominated the center of the room, a massive cylindrical chamber pulsing with blue light. Around it stood row upon row of cryopods, each containing a frozen human figure. Grayson's breath fogged in the sudden chill. Backups. Voss moved to the control terminal, her fingers flying across the keys. Worse. Originals. She pulled up a file, and Grayson's stomach turned. The screen displayed a frozen face he knew intimately. His own. Shaw's voice echoed from the stairwell. You really shouldn't have come down here. She stepped into the light, her suit immaculate, her pistol steady. Behind her, the remaining echoes fanned out. Some perfect copies of guards, others still shifting between forms. Voss didn't turn from the terminal. I'm locking the cryo sequence. If they thaw now, the neural patterns degrade. Shaw sighed. Lillian. Still trying to atone. She raised her weapon. How very human of you. Grayson moved on instinct. His bullet took Shaw on the shoulder, spinning her around as her own shot went wide, shattering a cryo tube. The figure inside slumped forward, frozen solid. Chaos erupted. Kane dove behind the reactor housing, returning fire as the echoes charged. Grayson grabbed Voss and shoved her toward the core. Do it now. Voss didn't hesitate. She slammed her palm against the emergency override. The reactor's hum became a shriek. Alarms blared as the core began its meltdown sequence. Shaw screamed something lost in the noise, her perfect hair whipping in the sudden wind as the cooling systems failed. The echoes faltered, their forms rippling uncontrollably as the nanites destabilized. Kane grabbed Grayson's arm. We have to go. Voss didn't move from the terminal. I'm staying. Grayson reached for her. Like hell. She met his eyes. Someone has to manually trigger the final overload. And it should be me. Her smile was sad. I built the first prototypes, Elijah. Let me end this. Another explosion rocked the facility. The ceiling groaned. Kane pulled Grayson toward the emergency exit. We have 30 seconds. The last thing Grayson saw before the door sealed was Voss typing furiously, her face lit by the reactor's hellish glow. The tunnel shook as they ran. Behind them, the facility died in a ball of fire that sent shockwaves through the earth. Grayson didn't look back. Above ground, dawn was breaking over the city. Somewhere in the ruins below, Shaw and her twisted dream burned. Kane collapsed on the grass, coughing. What now? Grayson watched the smoke rise against the pinkening sky. Now we wait. And if more of them survived? Grayson thought of the faces in the tanks. The frozen originals. The way Daniel had bled real blood. Then they'll come for us. He turned toward the city. And we'll be ready. 3 weeks later, the city tried to pretend nothing had happened. The official story was simple. A gas line explosion at an abandoned industrial site. No mention of the bodies pulled from the wreckage. Some frozen solid, others little more than bubbling sludge in ruined suits. The news cycled through its usual outrage before moving on to fresher scandals. Grayson watched it all from a rented room above a Chinatown laundromat, the glow of the television painting his face in shifting blues. His ribs still ached from the blast. His knuckles were still scabbed from where he'd punched through a car window to pull Kane free of the wreckage. The knock came at midnight. Grayson had his pistol in hand before the second rap, moving soundlessly to peer through the peephole. Marcus Kane stood in the hallway, a bottle of whiskey in one hand, a manila envelope in the other. His left arm was in a sling. Grayson unchained the door. Kane limped inside, dropping the bottle on the table with a thunk. You look like hell. You should see the other guys. Grayson relocked the door. They find any more of them? Kane shook his head. Just the facility staff. No sign of Shaw's body, but... He trailed off, looking at the news footage of the crater. Nobody could have survived that. Grayson wasn't so sure. He took the envelope Kane offered, spilling its contents across the table. Surveillance photos, bank records, a shipping manifest dated 2 days before the explosion. Kane poured 2 fingers of whiskey. Voss had a partner.
Somebody funneling her research to Shaw before she even knew it was being weaponized. Grayson froze with a photo halfway to the light. The image showed a younger Voss shaking hands with a silver-haired man at a charity gala. The caption listed the man as a keynote speaker. Dr. Robert Aldrich. Grayson's vision tunneled. Aldrich had testified for Cartwright during the trial. Called Grayson's evidence circumstantial. The jury had eaten it up. Kane watched him piece it together. Aldrich disappeared the night of the explosion. Private jet to Buenos Aires. Grayson set the photo down carefully. You think he was running the whole thing? I think Shaw was a puppet. Kane knocked back his drink. And I think we just cut the strings. Outside, a siren wailed past. Grayson studied the shipping manifest. A cargo container routed through Singapore. Contents listed as medical equipment. The date stamp was yesterday. Kane followed his gaze. We'll never prove it was him. Grayson folded the manifest into his pocket. Don't need to. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the city, 100 faces slept unaware of how close they'd come to being replaced. 100 lives that would never know the war fought in the shadows to keep them real. Kane stood with a groan. Get some sleep. We start digging tomorrow. Grayson didn't answer. He was already at the window, watching the rain-slick streets below. Waiting. The game wasn't over. It never really ended. The rain battered the windows of the safe house as Grayson traced a finger over the shipping manifest. Buenos Aires. A dead end. Too clean. Too obvious. His reflection in the glass looked haunted, eyes sunken from weeks of sleeping with one hand on his gun. Kane snored on the couch, his sling discarded on the floor. The whiskey bottle stood empty beside a stack of files, autopsy reports from the facility. None of the bodies had been Shaw's. Grayson's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered without speaking. A voice whispered, asterisk not asterisk Shaw's. Younger. Female. They lied about Aldrich. Grayson's pulse spiked. Who is this? A pause. Then, Asset 13. The line went dead. Grayson was shrugging into his jacket when Kane jerked awake. What now? New player. Grayson tossed him the phone. Check the trace. Kane squinted at the screen. Christ. Call originated from the morgue. The twist asterisk. Asset 13 is a next-gen Echo who developed full consciousness and rebelled. She's been posing as the coroner, altering autopsy reports to hide survivors. Reveals Aldrich faked his escape. He's still in the city, overseeing Phase 2. The morgue's fluorescent lights buzzed like angry hornets. Grayson moved between stainless steel tables, his breath fogging in the chilled air. At the far end, a slight figure in a lab coat stood over an open cadaver drawer. You're late, she said without turning. Grayson kept his hand near his weapon. 13. She turned, mid-20s, dark hair pulled into a messy bun, a jagged scar running from her temple to her jaw. Call me Leah. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I'd say it's nice to meet you, but we already have. 3 times. Kane stiffened. What? Leah tapped a monitor. Security footage played. Grayson and Kane entering the morgue 48 hours earlier. Only neither remembered being there. Echo duplicates, Grayson realized. They sent copies of us to retrieve something. Leah yanked open the drawer. Inside lay a perfect replica of Aldrich, throat slashed. They're tying loose ends. The real Aldrich is still out there. She pulled a drive from the corpse's clenched fist. But he made one mistake. The drive contained blueprints for a neural archive, a way to digitize human consciousness. Kane paled. They're not just replacing people anymore. Leah nodded. They're building a library. Every thought, every memory. To wear someone's face is one thing. She met Grayson's gaze. To become them down to their nightmares? That's forever. A crash echoed from the lobby. Leah's head snapped up. They're here. Grayson drew his weapon. Who? The lights died. In the darkness, a dozen voices whispered in perfect unison. Elijah! The morgue plunged into absolute darkness. Grayson's training kicked in before his conscious mind could process the whispering voices.
He grabbed Leah's wrist and yanked her behind an autopsy table just as the first bullets shattered glassware overhead. "Back exit," Kane hissed, but the chorus of voices answered from every direction. "No exit." Leah's fingers dug into Grayson's arm. Their networked, shared consciousness. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. The more of them there are, the smarter they get. Grayson flipped the heavy steel table with a grunt, sending medical instruments clattering across the floor. "How many?" 12 in this wave." Leah pressed something cold into his hand. "A bone saw. But they'll call more once." The power surged back on with a blinding flash. They stood in perfect formation between the rows of corpses, 12 copies of the same broad-shouldered security officer, their faces flickering between identities like a glitching screen. All had their weapons trained center mass. The lead echo tilted its head. "Asset 13. You are malfunctioning." Leah bared her teeth. "I'm awake." Chaos erupted. Grayson fired 3 rounds into the lead echo's chest while Leah vaulted over the table, bone saw whirring. The thing didn't go down. It changed, its wound sealing as its face morphed into a perfect copy of Kane. "Marcus!" Grayson shouted in warning, just as the real Kane tackled the imposter from behind, jamming a scalpel into its neck. "Not today, you bastard!" The fight became a nightmare of shifting faces and impossible reflexes. Grayson put a bullet through an echo's skull only for it to rise seconds later with his face. Leah fought like a demon, her movements almost precognitive. She knew how they'd attack before they did. "They're learning!" she screamed as an echo grabbed her by the hair. Grayson lunged, but too late. The echo snapped Leah's neck with a sickening crack. Her body crumpled, but not before she jammed her thumb into the echo's eye. The thing shrieked as its face destabilized, melting like wax. Kane grabbed Grayson's arm. "We have to move." They ran for the loading bay, pursued by the remaining echoes. Grayson's mind raced. Leah's last words, the way she'd fought. She knew. The alley behind the morgue stank of rotting garbage. Grayson shoved Kane behind a dumpster just as the first echo burst through the doors. Leah was one of them, Grayson breathed. But she was different. Kane ejected a spent magazine. "Yeah, well, she's dead now." A new voice cut through the darkness. "Not quite." The shadows near the wall rippled, and Leah stepped forward, very much alive. Blood dripped from a fresh wound on her temple where the scar had been moments before. Grayson's pistol snapped up. "What the hell are you?" Leah touched her bleeding forehead. "The upgrade." Behind her, the echoes pursuing them froze mid-step, their faces going blank. Aldrich's masterpiece, a self-replicating neural archive. She smiled bitterly. "You can't kill me, Elijah. I'm not in this body. I'm in all of them." The frozen echoes collapsed like marionettes with cut strings. Kane made a strangled noise. "You're controlling them?" Only for another 90 seconds before the network resets. Leah pressed a blood-smeared drive into Grayson's hand. "Aldrich isn't in Argentina. He's in the old Cartwright estate. And he's not working alone." Grayson's blood ran cold. "Who?" Leah's body suddenly jerked, her spine arching unnaturally. "Oh God, they're taking back control." Her eyes locked onto Grayson's, pleading. "The warden from Blackridge? He wasn't corrupt. He was replaced 2 years ago." Her head snapped to the side with an audible crack. When she looked back, her expression was empty. Phase 2 commences in 12 hours. The voice was no longer Leah's. Compliance will be rewarded. Leah's body collapsed. In the distance, sirens wailed. Kane stared at the drive. What the fuck is Phase 2? Grayson was already moving. The reason they needed a prison. The final pieces clicked together. The abuse, the isolation, the psychological profiling. Blackridge hadn't been about breaking him. It had been research. The Cartwright estate loomed behind iron gates, its manicured grounds eerily still. Grayson crouched in the tree line, watching thermal signatures move through the mansion via Kane's hacked satellite feed. "They've got at least 30 hostiles inside," Kane whispered. "All echoes." Grayson checked his weapon. "We're not going in." Kane blinked. "Then how?" A distant rumble cut him off. The ground trembled as a black SUV convoy snaked up the driveway. Grayson zoomed in on the lead vehicle's passenger, an elderly man with silver hair. "Aldrich," Kane breathed. But Grayson's attention locked onto the figure who stepped out to greet him. Oh, military posture. A face he hadn't seen in 8 years. Colonel Elias Graves. His old CO. The man who'd personally signed off on Grayson's dishonorable discharge after he'd uncovered the weapons smuggling ring. Kane stiffened. "Isn't that the same bastard who railroaded me?" Grayson's finger hovered near the detonator in his pocket. "Yeah, which means we just found the architect." The truth asterisk. Graves had been perfecting mind control tech for the military for decades. Blackridge was a live test. How to break and rebuild a human psyche. The echoes were just Phase 1. Phase 2 was neural overwriting, forcing uploaded consciousness into living hosts. Grayson moved like a shadow through the estate security blind spots, places Leah's intel had marked before she'd been overwritten. The mansion's basement entrance was unguarded. Too easy. The steel door hissed open to reveal a laboratory straight out of a nightmare. Rows of occupied medical chairs faced a massive screen displaying pulsing neural maps. Each chair held a person, some conscious, their eyes darting wildly, others eerily still, all wired into a central server bank. At the room's heart stood Graves, his dress uniform immaculate as he examined a glowing hologram of a human brain. Elijah. He didn't turn around. "I wondered when you'd come." Grayson stepped into the light, weapon raised. "Shut it down." Graves chuckled. "And waste 20 years of research?" He gestured to the screen. "This is evolution. No more war. No more dissent. Just perfect order." A whimper drew Grayson's attention. In the nearest chair, a teenage boy trembled as cables snaked into his skull. The screen above him displayed 97% overwrite complete. Kane's voice crackled in Grayson's earpiece. "The whole block's rigged with explosives. They're fail-safe." Graves followed Grayson's gaze. "Beautiful, isn't it? We don't even need the tanks anymore. Just 30 minutes to imprint a fresh mind onto living tissue." He smiled. "Starting with every inmate at Blackridge next week." Grayson's finger tightened on the trigger. As the doors burst open behind him, 6 echoes marched in, dragging a beaten Kane. Blood dripped from his nose, but he managed to grin. "Hey boss. Bad news, we're surrounded." Graves sighed. "Kill the lawyer. Keep Grayson alive. His neural profile is exceptional." The echoes raised their weapons. Grayson hit the detonator. The endgame asterisk. The explosives weren't Graves, they were Leah's, planted during her morgue infiltration. As the mansion burned, Grayson dragged Kane and the boy to safety. Graves' final words: "You can't stop progress, Elijah. I'm already in the cloud." Epilogue. 2 months later. The news called it a terrorist attack. The official report listed Graves and Aldrich among the dead. Grayson knew better. He watched from a rooftop as the boy, Javier reunited with his family at a bus station. The kid remembered nothing after his abduction. A blessing. Kane limped up beside him, sipping terrible coffee. "You sure Graves uploaded himself?" Grayson studied the city below. Somewhere out there, echoes still hid in the wild. Somewhere, servers hummed with stolen minds. "No," he lied. Kane nodded, then handed him a file. Inside were blueprints for a black site in Alaska. A fresh start for Graves' work. Grayson lit the file with his cigarette and dropped it into the storm drain. The game wasn't over. But for today, it was enough.